There was a time in America when lunch did not begin with an app, a drive-thru window, or a plastic clamshell on the passenger seat. It began with a stool. A round stool, usually bolted to the floor, in front of a long counter at a diner, a drugstore, a five and dime, a department store, or a little lunchroom on Main Street. You could hear plates sliding across stainless steel. You could hear coffee cups landing on saucers. Behind the counter, somebody was working fast with a spatula, a ladle, and a memory full of regular orders. Not every town had the same menu. Not every counter served every dish on this list. But across the country, certain meals kept showing up again and again. Hot sandwiches under gravy, salad sandwiches on white bread, soup with crackers, pie under glass, and a daily special that tasted more like home than like a restaurant. Today, we are looking back at 25 lost lunch counter meals every American town used to have, or at least every American town seemed to remember having once the counter was gone. Number 25. Coffee and pie as lunch. This was not a meal that would impress a nutritionist. It was a decision made by a person who had 20 minutes, a few coins, and a favourite stool. At the old counter, a cup of coffee and a slice of pie could count as lunch if the day had been long enough. Apple pie, coconut cream, lemon meringue, cherry, custard, chocolate cream, whatever sat in the case under the curved glass. The waitress did not need a speech. She knew who wanted it warmed, who wanted cheese on apple pie, and who wanted the corner piece because the crust was darker. It was a tiny meal, but it carried a whole public life with it. A man from the hardware store, a woman taking a break from shopping, a retired couple splitting one slice. Lunch did not always have to be a plate. Sometimes it was coffee, pie, and 10 minutes of being known. Number 24. The egg salad sandwich. Egg salad was the quiet lunch counter sandwich. It did not arrive sizzling, it did not drip gravy, and it did not need a story about where it was invented. It was chopped hard-boiled egg, mayonnaise, salt, pepper, maybe celery, maybe a little mustard, pressed between soft slices of white, wheat, or rye. At many counters, it came with potato chips and a pickle spear. Sometimes it came wrapped in wax paper. Sometimes it was cut diagonally and pinned with a toothpick. The appeal was simple. It was cheap, filling, soft, and familiar. Egg salad belonged to the old family of luncheon salads, the kind that could be scooped onto lettuce or tucked between bread. It was the sandwich you ordered when you did not want a heavy meal, but you still wanted lunch to feel like lunch. Number 23. The ham salad sandwich. Ham salad feels almost like a ghost now. For decades, it made sense. Leftover ham could be chopped fine, mixed with mayonnaise, maybe pickle relish, maybe celery, maybe onion, and turned into something spreadable. On a lunch counter menu, it sat beside egg salad, chicken salad, tuna salad, and other sandwiches that did not require a griddle. The ham salad sandwich had a particular texture. Salty, creamy, a little sweet if relish was involved, and very old-fashioned even before it disappeared. It was the kind of thing a grandmother might make after Easter or Christmas, but at one time it also belonged to public lunch. Today, when you see ham salad, it usually feels regional, church supper old, or delicatessen old. That is exactly why it belongs here. It was not glamorous, it was practical, and lunch counters were built on practical food. Number 22. The chicken salad sandwich. Chicken salad was the respectable cousin in the salad sandwich case. It could be plain or fancy. Some counters made it with chopped celery and mayonnaise. Some added hard-boiled egg. Some used leftover roast chicken. Others made it smooth, almost like a spread. On toast, on white bread, on rye, or in a triple-decker club, chicken salad was a dependable lunch. It also belonged to a slightly softer kind of counter meal. Not the gravy plate, not the blue-collar hot special. This was the lunch you might order during a shopping trip, after church, or at a department store counter when you wanted something tidy enough to eat with one hand and a fork full of coleslaw on the side. Chicken salad never vanished entirely, but the world that made it feel like a standard counter order has thinned out. It used to be ordinary. Now, when it is done the old way, it feels like a memory. Number 21. The stuffed tomato salad plate. There was a time when a tomato could become lunch. Not by itself, of course. The old salad plate might start with a ripe tomato, cut open like a flower and filled with tuna salad, chicken salad, egg salad, cottage cheese, or sometimes a scoop of something cold and creamy from the back counter. Around it came lettuce leaves, crackers, maybe potato salad, maybe a few slices of cucumber. It was lunch counter light eating before the modern salad bar took over. It looked dainty, but it was filling enough for a person who did not want fried food at noon. The stuffed tomato plate feels very mid-century now. It belongs to tea rooms, cafeterias, department stores, and counters where the cold case mattered as much as the grill. The plate was simple, but it had a little ceremony to it. A tomato opened up, a scoop placed in the center, and lunch made to look nicer than the price suggested. Before we go deeper, it is worth remembering something about these meals. Lunch counters were not just small restaurants. They were public rooms. People sat shoulder to shoulder with strangers. They read newspapers. They watched the cook work. They talked to the person behind the counter. The food was simple because the place was doing some of the work. A sandwich tasted better when the coffee was hot, the stool was familiar, and the waitress called the order before you had fully sat down.
Number 20. Franks and beans. Franks and beans was one of those meals that made no apology for itself. It was hot dogs and baked beans, often served together on a plate or in a shallow bowl, sometimes with brown bread, toast, or a roll. Diners' slang even preserved a name for it: hounds on an island. That alone tells you it had a real place in counterculture. The dish was cheap, warm, and easy to hold on a steam table. It could feed a kid, a worker, a retiree, or anyone who wanted something hearty without ordering a full roast dinner. The sweetness of the beans, the snap of the frank, the mustard on the side, all of it belonged to the lunch counter's idea of economy. You can still find franks and beans in old-school places, but it no longer feels like a default public lunch. It feels like something from a menu that refused to chase fashion. Number 19. Bean soup with crackers. Bean soup was not flashy. That was the point. In old institutional restaurants, cafeterias, diners, and counters, a bowl of bean soup could carry a whole lunch. Navy beans, ham or ham bone, onion, maybe celery, maybe potato depending on the kitchen, simmered until the broth thickened. Then came the crackers, either in a wax sleeve or already waiting in a little metal basket. The United States Senate has kept bean soup as a restaurant tradition for more than a century, which tells you something about the dish. It is not trendy food. It is durable food. At a small-town counter, bean soup was the kind of thing that sat on the menu because people actually ate it. It warmed you up. It stretched ingredients. It made a person feel fed without spectacle. Today, soup is often a side note. At the old counter, a bowl of bean soup could be the reason you came in. Number 18. Cream chipped beef on toast. Cream chipped beef on toast came from a tougher, more institutional corner of American eating. Thin dried beef, salty and preserved, folded into a white cream gravy and ladled over toast. In military kitchens, versions of this dish were known by a nickname that was not exactly polite, but soldiers remembered it. The National Park Service even connects a chipped beef recipe to the 1910 Manual for Army Cooks. From mess halls, boarding houses, and home kitchens, the dish moved through American memory as a plate that could feed many people with very little. On a lunch counter, it made sense: toast, gravy, salt, heat, and enough richness to get somebody through the day. It was not beautiful food. It was beige food. But a lot of American comfort food is beige because beige usually means bread, gravy, potatoes, cream, and survival. Number 17. Chicken a la king on toast. Chicken a la king sounds fancier than most lunch counter food, but that is part of its charm. It was diced chicken in a cream sauce, often with pimentos and sometimes mushrooms or peas, served over toast, biscuits, rice, or a pastry shell. Food historians do not agree on one clean origin story, so the safer thing to say is that by the early 20th century it had become a familiar luncheon dish. At a counter, it let a kitchen turn cooked chicken into something warm and respectable. It was creamy, soft, and easy to serve with a ladle. The toast underneath was not decoration. It was the structure of the meal. This is one of those dishes that once sounded proper and now sounds antique. But if you imagine it arriving on a thick white plate, steam rising from the cream sauce, it becomes easy to understand why people ordered it. Number 16. Chicken croquettes. Chicken croquettes were lunch counter thrift dressed up in a crisp coat. They took chopped chicken, white sauce, seasoning, and breadcrumbs, then shaped the mixture into small cones, patties, or ovals before frying or baking. On the plate, they usually came with mashed potatoes and gravy. Sometimes peas. Sometimes cranberry sauce. Always the sense that leftovers had been turned into something special. Howard Johnson's helped make chicken croquettes familiar to a wider public, and old-school diners in parts of the country still keep them on menus. But the dish belongs to an older way of cooking, when nothing useful was wasted and texture mattered. Crisp outside, soft inside, gravy over the top. For a lunch counter, croquettes were perfect. They looked neat. They were easy to portion. And they made a modest amount of chicken feel like a complete meal. Number 15. Salisbury steak. Salisbury steak has lived several lives. It began with 19th century health ideas around chopped beef, then drifted into cafeterias, lunchrooms, frozen dinners, family restaurants, and old diner menus. By the time most people remember it, Salisbury steak meant a seasoned oval of ground beef under brown gravy, usually beside mashed potatoes. At a counter, it was a steak for people who were not ordering steak. It looked like a chopped beef patty, but the name gave it a little dignity. The gravy did the rest. This is one of the great lunch counter tricks: make a simple ingredient feel like a plate dinner. Salisbury steak did exactly that. It was not rare, not expensive, not delicate. It was hot, brown, filling, and dependable. For many Americans, that was lunch. There is a kind of food that disappears not because people hate it, but because the culture around it changes. These meals were working lunches. They were built for clerks, drivers, shoppers, factory workers, office workers, kids with grandparents, and people who needed to eat in the middle of the day without making an event of it. They were cheap without being treated as shameful. That is a big part of what feels lost. Number 14. The meatloaf plate. Meatloaf was one of the great anchors of the old lunch counter. A slice of meatloaf, brown gravy, mashed potatoes, and a vegetable. Maybe green beans. Maybe peas. Maybe carrots. Nothing about it was surprising, and that was exactly the appeal. Meatloaf showed up in home kitchens, diners, family restaurants, cafeterias, and lunch counters because it solved a problem beautifully. Ground meat could be stretched with crumbs, egg, onion, seasoning, and whatever a kitchen believed made its version special. Then it could be sliced cleanly, reheated, and served as if it had been waiting just for you. At the counter, meatloaf felt like eating dinner at noon. The plate was heavy. The gravy ran into the potatoes. The vegetable sat there doing its duty. It was one of the most honest meals in the room. Number 13. Liver and onions. Few dishes separate generations like liver and onions. For some people, the smell alone is childhood punishment. For others, it is a deeply old-school pleasure. Beef liver, floured and fried or grilled, covered with onions, sometimes bacon, and served with potatoes. On diner menus, it was not strange. It was a normal plate. Liver made sense in an era when people were more comfortable eating the whole animal, and when economy mattered. It was nutritious, inexpensive, and strong-flavored enough to announce itself from the kitchen. Today, liver and onions survives in pockets, especially in older diners and family restaurants. But it no longer feels like ordinary public food. It feels like a test of memory. If you loved it, you really loved it. If you hated it, you probably remember the exact table where you learned that. Number 12. The roast chicken plate. Before fast food turned chicken into buckets, nuggets, and sandwiches, lunch counters could serve roast chicken as a plate lunch. Old dime store counters advertised real plate lunches: roast chicken with dressing, potatoes, vegetables, salad, rolls. It sounds almost too much for a quick counter meal now, but those counters were capable kitchens. They had steam tables, ovens, refrigeration, dishwashing systems, and the need to feed crowds fast. A roast chicken plate at noon was not fancy. It was a small version of Sunday dinner, placed in the middle of a workday. Dressing, gravy, potatoes, peas, maybe cranberry sauce if turkey was involved, all served on a sturdy plate by someone who had done this 1,000 times. It reminds us that old lunch counters were not just sandwich shops. Some of them served real meals, quickly, to people who expected more from lunch than a wrapper. Number 11. The hot hamburger sandwich with gravy. The hot hamburger sandwich was not a burger in the modern sense. It was usually an open-faced plate. Bread on the bottom, hamburger patty or chopped beef on top, gravy over everything, and mashed potatoes beside it or tucked into the same flood. You ate it with a fork. You did not pick it up. Food history around hot sandwiches shows how common this structure became in quick lunch places: bread, meat, gravy, potato. It was economical and filling, and it let a counter turn the familiar hamburger into something that looked more like dinner. The hot hamburger sandwich was a working person's plate. No lettuce, no special sauce, no branding. Just beef, bread, gravy, and potatoes. It belonged to a world where a ladle of gravy could turn almost anything into a meal. Number 10. Hot roast beef sandwich with gravy. The hot roast beef sandwich may be one of the purest lunch counter meals ever made. 2 slices of bread, roast beef, gravy over the top, mashed potatoes on the side, sometimes more gravy over the potatoes. In different regions, it carried different names, but the idea was the same. It was soft, hot, salty, and almost impossible to eat neatly. This meal had deep practical logic. Leftover roast beef could be sliced thin. Bread caught the gravy. Potatoes made it filling. The plate could be assembled quickly, and the customer walked away feeling as if they had eaten a real meal, not just a sandwich. It still survives in certain diners and roadside restaurants, but it used to feel much more ordinary. The hot roast beef sandwich was not retro. It was Tuesday. Here is the secret of the old counter: gravy was technology. One ladle could bind bread, meat, potatoes, and leftovers into lunch. It made dry things soft, cheap things rich, and yesterday's roast feel like today's special. A modern menu might call that rustic or comfort food. The lunch counter just called it ready. Number 9. The open-faced turkey sandwich. The open-faced turkey sandwich was a holiday meal reduced to lunch counter size. Turkey on bread, gravy over the top, mashed potatoes nearby, maybe stuffing, maybe cranberry sauce if the kitchen leaned that way. Some old dime store counters served turkey plates year-round, not just in November. That made sense. Turkey could be bought, roasted, sliced, and turned into many meals. At the counter, this was the plate you ordered when you wanted something gentle. Turkey did not have the heaviness of beef. The gravy softened everything. The bread disappeared under the knife and fork. It was almost nursery food for adults, but in the best way. The open-faced turkey sandwich is not gone, but it has retreated. You are more likely to find it where the menu still respects mashed potatoes. And that is exactly where it belongs. Number 8. The club sandwich with chips. The club sandwich was the lunch counter's architecture project. Toast, turkey or chicken, bacon, lettuce, tomato, mayonnaise, sometimes ham, sometimes 3 slices of bread, all cut into triangles and held together with toothpicks. On the side, potato chips, pickle, maybe coleslaw. The club sandwich has debated origins, with food historians generally placing it in American restaurant and club culture in the late 19th or early 20th century. By the time lunch counters were in their prime, it was fully at home there. In fact, a 1938 drugstore lunch counter record includes club sandwiches among the foods served. The club looked abundant without being a hot plate. It was crisp, salty, cool, and tall. When it arrived, it felt like the counter had built you something. Number 7. The toasted tuna sandwich. Before the tuna melt name became common, there was the toasted tuna sandwich. This was exactly the kind of thing a lunch counter could do well. Tuna salad, bread, heat, maybe cheese, maybe not, toasted until the outside had a little crunch and the inside turned warm. A 1938 drugstore lunch counter record specifically mentions toasted tuna sandwiches, which makes this one feel especially anchored to the world we are remembering. Canned tuna became a 20th century American staple because it was affordable, shelf-stable, and easy to mix into salads and sandwiches. At the counter, it offered something lighter than roast beef but more substantial than egg salad. The toasted tuna sandwich was modest, but it had that griddle magic. Cold salad became hot lunch. Bread became crisp. The smell moved down the counter, and suddenly someone else wanted one too. Number 6. The tuna melt. The tuna melt is younger than some people assume, at least under that exact name. Food history suggests tuna and cheese combinations appeared after World War II, while the phrase tuna melt became more visible later, especially in family restaurant advertising in the 1970s. That makes it a bridge between the older lunch counter and the later coffee shop or family restaurant. But emotionally, it belongs here. Tuna salad, melted cheese, griddled bread, maybe rye, maybe white, maybe an open face under the broiler. It was warm without being a full dinner, cheap without feeling poor, and rich enough to make canned tuna feel like an indulgence. A good tuna melt had contrast: crisp bread, creamy tuna, melted cheese, a little sharpness from pickle or onion. It was not elegant. It was better than elegant. It was useful. Number 5. The patty melt. The patty melt is what happens when a hamburger wanders onto rye bread and decides to become old school. A thin beef patty, grilled onions, Swiss cheese, and rye bread toasted on the griddle. Many people credit Tiny Nailers restaurants in Los Angeles with creating or popularizing the patty melt, and the sandwich was on their menus in the early 1950s. That many people credit matters, because food origin stories are often messy. Wherever it began, the patty melt became diner royalty. It used the flat-top griddle perfectly. The onion softened. The cheese melted. The rye browned in butter. It was a burger, but more adult, more fragrant, and somehow more connected to the counter. If a lunch counter had a good grill cook, the patty melt was a way to prove it. By this point, you can start to see why these meals faded. Fast food changed speed. Shopping malls changed where people ate. Five and dimes closed counters. Drugstores stopped acting like restaurants. Main Street lost foot traffic. An American lunch became more portable, more packaged, and more private. The old counter was slow by modern standards, But it gave people something speed cannot replace: a place to sit. Number 4. The fried bologna sandwich. The fried bologna sandwich is humble enough to be underestimated. Bologna was cheap, sliceable, and familiar across much of America, especially in working-class regions. Bologna sandwiches became common in the 20th century because sliced meat and sliced bread made lunch easy. Frying the bologna changed everything. The edges curled. The center blistered. The smell filled the kitchen or the counter grill. On a sandwich, fried bologna might get mustard, mayonnaise, pickles, onion, or American cheese. Some people ate it on white bread. Some wanted it on a bun. Some wanted it thick cut enough to feel like ham pretending not to be ham. It was never fancy, but it carried a fierce nostalgia. Fried bologna tasted like making do, but also like getting lucky with what was in the refrigerator. Number 3. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Grilled cheese is one of those foods that seems too simple to have a history, but it does. Food Timeline notes that recipes under the name grilled cheese appear in American print by the 1930s, and old newspaper references described grilled cheese sandwiches being found in drugstores for lunch. That is exactly the atmosphere this list is chasing. At the counter, grilled cheese meant bread browned in butter and cheese melted until it pulled just enough. Add tomato soup, and the whole thing became more than a sandwich. The soup gave you something to dip. The sandwich gave the soup a reason to exist. This meal survived better than most because children loved it and adults never fully stopped loving it. But the old lunch counter version, served on a plate with a cup of soup and maybe a pickle, still has a particular glow. Number 2. A bowl of chili with crackers. Chili was perfect counter food. It could sit hot. It could be ladled fast. It could be served plain, with beans, without beans, with onions, with cheese, over spaghetti in some regions, or simply in a bowl with crackers. Old diner language had names for chili, and old lunch counter photographs showed chili advertised as a quick meal. A bowl of chili did not need a full kitchen performance. It needed a pot, a ladle, and confidence. The customer could make it last with crackers. The counter could sell it on a cold day. The smell alone could pull someone in from the sidewalk. Chili also reminds us that lunch counters were local. A bowl in New Mexico, Ohio, Texas, Missouri, or New York might mean different things. That was part of the beauty. The counter looked familiar, but the bowl could still belong to the place. Number 1. The Blue Plate Special. The Blue Plate Special was not one dish. It was the whole lunch counter promise on one plate. Meat or fish. 2 vegetables. Maybe potatoes. Maybe gravy. Maybe whatever the kitchen needed to move that day. The phrase became especially familiar in the 1920s and 1930s, and earlier references describe a daily special served on one plate with meat or fish and vegetables. It fit a country that was speeding up but still wanted a noon meal that looked like dinner. The Blue Plate Special worked because it removed the decision. You did not study a menu. You asked what the special was. If it sounded good, you ordered it. Roast beef, meatloaf, fish, ham, chicken, pork chops. Whatever it was, it came as a complete plate. That is what makes it number 1. The Blue Plate Special was the lunch counter at its most honest, fast, filling, affordable, and familiar enough to trust. When people miss old lunch counters, they are not only missing the food. They are missing a way of eating in public that felt ordinary and human. A place where lunch had plates instead of packaging. A place where coffee was refilled before you asked. A place where a person could sit alone without feeling lonely, because the counter itself provided company. The meals on this list were not perfect. Some were plain. Some were heavy. Some were made from leftovers. Some would never survive a modern menu consultant. But they fed people through workdays, shopping trips, bus rides, paydays, snowstorms, Saturday errands, and quiet afternoons when a slice of pie was enough. And maybe that is why they stay with us. Because a lunch counter meal was never just a meal. It was a stool, a plate, a cup, a voice from behind the counter, and the feeling that for a few minutes, in the middle of the day, America had saved you a seat.